The man who grabbed him weighed 260 pounds and had never in 15 years lost a grip on anyone. 6 seconds after his fist closed on that blue jacket, he was standing in the middle of a network stage with his hand open, his arm gone soft, and no idea what had been done to him. The singer in the guest chair never stood up. He watched and did not blink, and afterward he would not talk about it for years. It was a variety show taping in the early 1970s, one of those velvet and cigarette smoke evenings Hollywood built its self-image on. The host worked behind a wooden desk with a drink at his elbow and had spent 20 years being the most relaxed man in any room he entered. That was his act, and it was not entirely an act. Blue curtains, gold lattice, 200 people in risers close enough to hear things never meant for broadcast. The singer came in black velvet with an open collar and a gold cross. He had spent years collecting martial arts the way other men collected cars, and he had asked privately through a producer for the small man in the blue suit to be booked the same night. He had watched a piece of tournament footage maybe 50 times, and he wanted to see the man in a room. And with the singer, as always, came the third man, not a guest, staff, the largest human being on that stage by a considerable margin, a former athlete gone thick through the chest, in a brown suit let out at the seams, on the security detail long enough to believe the singer's fame was partly his own. He had been in a bad temper since the moment he learned the segment was not going to be about the man he protected. If you want to know why a man who was paid to be invisible decided to make himself the center of a network broadcast, stay with this because it started before the cameras rolled in a hallway where nobody was watching. The small man arrived alone. That was the first thing the crew noticed, and the thing they all mentioned later. No entourage, no manager, one small bag, a blue three-piece suit he had clearly chosen because television was a formal thing, and he intended to respect it. He shook the floor manager's hand and asked the name of the woman doing the sound check and used it. In the corridor outside the green rooms, he passed the big man in the brown suit, and the big man did not move out of the way, and the small man went around him without any change of expression. It lasted 2 seconds. The big man watched him go and said something to the wall that a lighting tech heard and repeated for the next 30 years. He said, "That's it? That's the guy?" Because here was the thing about the big man, and the crew understood it even if he did not. He had been the strongest man in every room of his life. High school, the service, the practice squad, the door of every club he ever worked. Strength had answered every question anyone ever put to him. Now he stood in a hallway in Burbank, watching a 135-pound man in a good suit walk past, and he could feel the whole building's interest rearranging itself around that man, and he had no category for it. So he decided the man was a fraud. It was the only shape the feeling could take. The taping went fine for 20 minutes. The host was the host, loose, funny, one hand near the drink. The singer talked about touring and the karate he was studying, gracious the way famous people are when meeting someone they actually admire. Then the host turned to the small man and asked, with a lift of the eyebrow worth more than a paragraph, whether all that speed the papers kept writing about was real or something the cameras helped with. The small man said a camera can only record what happens, and that if you slow film down enough, everything looks explainable. Then he said the thing that changed the room's temperature, without any edge at all. He said the reason speed looks like a trick is that most people watch the wrong thing. They watch the hand. The hand is the last part to move. The audience laughed, uncertain. The host leaned back, delighted, and asked whether he could demonstrate. The small man said easily that demonstrations were what he did, and that he would need a volunteer, and he looked around the stage in a mild, open way, and from the edge of the lights before anyone could speak, the big man in the brown suit said, "Use me." It was not in the rundown. The floor manager's head snapped up. The host, who had been reading rooms since before half the crew was born, put his drink down, and the singer, in the guest chair, said one word, the big man's first name, in a tone the people nearest the stage described as a warning, and the big man did not hear it or chose not to. He was already walking out from the wings into the light, and the audience made a sound because he was enormous and because they could feel that this was not planned. He stopped in front of the small man, a full head taller and 120 pounds heavier, standing the way big men stand when they want the crowd to do the math for them. He said, not into a microphone but loud enough, that he had been protecting people for 15 years, that he had put his hands on men who were actually dangerous, and that he had never seen any of this speed do a thing when someone simply took hold of you. Then he asked, with a smile that was not a smile, whether the small man wanted to try it, or whether he only did this on film. Here is the part worth staying for, because the small man was given every reason to escalate and did not take one of them. He did not stand up straighter. He did not stop smiling. He said quietly that he did not think this was a good idea, and he meant it. The sound engineer 6 feet away swore he meant it. He said, "This is a television show. There are cameras. Somebody could look foolish, and it does not have to be anyone." And the host said the big man's name from behind the desk and started to rise. And the big man, who could feel 200 people watching him be talked to gently by a man half his size, did the thing he had done his whole life when he felt small. He closed his fist around the front of the small man's jacket, high near the lapel, twisted the cloth into his hand and pulled. It was the grab he had used 100 times in doorways, the one that ends conversations. The small man came forward off balance, one arm swinging out, and the audience made a noise like something breaking, and the host was on his feet with one hand out saying, all right, that's enough." And the singer in the guest chair did not move at all. He sat there in black velvet with his hands on the arms of the chair, and he watched, and later people who had known him for years said they had never seen him watch anything that way. What happened next took about 6 seconds, and the reason nobody could describe it afterward is that there was almost nothing to describe. The small man did not resist the pull. That was the first thing, and it undid everything after it. He went with it, a half step forward, into the big man, closer than the big man wanted him, so close the arm holding the jacket had nowhere left to extend. A grip like that needs distance to mean anything. Take the distance away, and it is a man holding a fistful of cloth with his elbow bent. His left hand came up and touched the inside of the big man's wrist. Not a grab, a touch, 2 fingers and a thumb, finding one specific place the way a mechanic finds a bolt in the dark. His body turned a few degrees. He exhaled once, short through his nose, and the big man's hand opened. He did not choose to open it. That was what he could never make anyone understand for the rest of his life. He was still trying to close it. The front riser watched his forearm cord up with the effort, and the hand would not obey him. Something done at that one point on the wrist had traveled up the arm and arrived somewhere below thought, and the message was that holding on was no longer among the available options. The blue jacket slid out of his fingers. His arm dropped and hung there, heavy and stupid, and he looked at it. The small man stepped back. He straightened his lapel with 2 fingers, unhurried, the way a man fixes his collar in an elevator. He was not breathing hard. He had not raised his voice. His other hand had never left his side, and the audience did not cheer because they did not know what they had seen. No strike. Nobody had fallen. A big man had grabbed a small man, and then the big man was standing there with his hand open, and the entire distance between those 2 facts had been covered in a movement most of the room missed entirely. The big man came at him again. Of course he did. Men like that always do, once, because there is a flaw underneath their identity, and it had just given way. He reached with both hands, a real grab, fast for his size, everything behind it. The small man was not there. He had not stepped back. He had stepped in, again, inside the arms, into the one place a man that size cannot use anything he has. And he put one open palm flat against the big man's midsection, under the ribs, and left it there. He did not strike. He rested his hand where a strike would have gone, and let the man feel it. The big man stopped. Everything about him stopped. He had been hit plenty in his life, and he knew the difference between a man bluffing and a man choosing. There was a hand on the one part of him that 15 years of being the biggest man in the room had never taught him to protect, resting there with no weight at all, and both of them knew exactly what it meant. The small man took his hand away, looked up at him, a long way up, and said something only the first 2 rows and the desk microphone caught. He said, "I told you nobody had to look foolish. Then you are very strong. That is real. It is just not the question." The host stood behind his desk with his arm still half out and did not say a word, which for that host was the loudest thing he could have done. The floor manager had frozen with his hand raised to cut, and the big man stood in the middle of a network stage in front of 200 people, working his hand open and closed, trying to make it feel like his own again. And then the singer stood up, not fast, not angry. He rose out of the guest chair in his black velvet, crossed the stage, and stopped beside his own bodyguard, and everyone braced for the wrong thing. What he did was put one hand on the big man's shoulder, gently, and say something short and private into the side of his head. Nobody has ever agreed on the words. The 2 people close enough said it was 5 or 6 syllables, and that it was not cruel. The big man nodded once and walked off the stage without looking at anybody, and he did not come back. Then the singer turned to the small man in the blue suit and put out his hand, and the small man took it, and the singer said, "This part was on the microphone. This part is not in dispute." He said, "Would you show me that?" And the small man said quietly, "Come to the school." And the audience finally belatedly applauded, and it was not the applause of people who had seen a fight. It was the sound a room makes when it has watched something it does not have a category for and has decided altogether that it liked it. The segment ran short. The host, who never let a silence go to waste in 20 years of television, let that one run 4 full seconds before he sat down, picked up his drink, looked into the camera, and said he had been doing this show a long time and was going to be thinking about that for a while. Then he went to commercial. The big man in the brown suit worked another 11 years. He told the story exactly twice that anyone can confirm, both times late, both times to people who had not asked. He never said the small man had beaten him, because in his telling nothing had happened that could be called a fight. What he said was stranger, and he said it the same way both times. "I had him. I had his coat in my hand and I had him, and then my hand opened and I have thought about it every day since, and I still could not tell you when I lost." Years later, people would argue about the details, the way they always do, how far the small man was pulled, whether it was 2 fingers on the wrist or 3, what the singer whispered, but everyone in that building agreed on the thing that mattered, and it was not what the small man did, it was what he did not do. He was grabbed by a man twice his size on live television, in front of 200 people and a host, and a legend in a velvet suit, and he never threw a punch, and he never raised his voice, and the biggest man on that stage still walked off it a different person than he walked on.